The German military occupation seldom interfered with religious activities. Ministers could preach and visit church members. During the second year of German rule, the Estonian Association of his church elected Victor their president. One morning, his office door flew open, and a church member hurried in. "Good morning, Mr. Tomer," Victor greeted the man. Excitedly, Mr. Tomer spilled out his news. "Remember all those books from our publishing house that the Russians confiscated? Well, I heard that many of them are stacked in a nationalized house not far from the church. The doors were locked, so I couldn't take a good look at them." His enthusiasm infected Victor, who stood up eagerly. "Maybe they're ours, but no." He sat down again. "I heard they shipped the books to a paper mill and converted them into new paper." After thinking for a minute, he said, "Let's check with the authorities, though. Since we can't print anything at all, those books would be a blessing, if they're ours. Come, let's get to work." Receiving permission from the German authorities to look at the books, he went with Mr. Tomer to the house. Apprehensively, he unlocked the door. In the dim light of the room, he deciphered first one familiar title, then another. "Just think," he mused, half to himself, "what this means to our church." He walked to the dusty window and opened the shutters. Sunlight streamed in and revealed piles and boxes of books. Victor returned to the government office to claim the books. "You'll have to pay for them," an official informed him, "because they belong to the state now." Mildly surprised, but determined, Victor replied, "Then we will buy them back." Soon the books once again lay on the shelves of his church's bookstore. The supply lasted until the German occupation ended. The cold Estonian winter, dropping snow on the thick pines, decorating castles and old churches with an icy beauty, lent a solemn silence to the country. Then spring winds blew, sweeping away the remains of winter, and spring moved into summer. Victor made his way down the narrow street, which the gathering dusk had made gloomy. While passing a streetlight, he glanced at his watch and sighed. 7 o'clock. Christina would be waiting, patiently, keeping supper warm. But he knew she understood when he came home late. He turned the corner and headed toward the hospital. That morning, a nurse and fellow church member had telephoned and asked him to come by. The urgency in her voice hinted that she had something important to tell him. He walked up to the second-floor ward, occupied by wounded Russian soldiers, now German prisoners of war. The nurse, Mrs. Jacobson, smiled at him, glanced around uneasily, and motioned him to the deserted visitor's alcove. "I have secretly studied the Bible with several of the soldiers," she whispered. "Now one young man is quite interested and I believe truly converted. He wants to see you." "But the law forbids any encounter between civilians and prisoners of war," he reminded her. "If I visited him, won't someone get suspicious and report us?" He and the other ministers used extreme caution and tact in their work. They wanted no trouble with the government. "Most of the staff have gone home. Please?" she pleaded. When Victor nodded, Mrs. Jacobson led him to the bed. The young man had many questions to ask, and his sincerity impressed Victor. Finally, the soldier stated, "Sir, I want to be baptized." The request took Victor by surprise. He gazed at the young man, then he looked down. It would be extremely risky. He raised his eyes and studied the soldier. Making a decision, which only the future could prove right or wrong, he promised, "We'll arrange for your baptism." He had ceased to question God's ways. 2 days later, early in the morning, Victor waited uncertainly in the hospital lobby. Soon Mrs. Jacobson came down the stairs with the prisoner of war. Victor smiled to himself. Somehow she had persuaded her superiors to let the soldier leave the hospital in her custody. On the street, he handed the POW a civilian coat, which would attract less attention. Silently, they walked down the deserted street, the scent of lilacs lying heavy in the morning mist. In the quietness of the sanctuary, Victor baptized the prisoner of war. Only later would the full realization of the incident come to the young church leader. The Russian soldier was the last person he would baptize in his own homeland.